Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren continue to fight it out for the lead of the 2020 Democratic field, according to 3 new polls. So, Steve, let's look at those. Biden at 27% and Warren at 23% are statistically tied in the latest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, sitting within 5-point margin of error. Senator Bernie Sanders is up 5 points since September, now sits at 19%. Biden and Warren are also statistically tied in the newest Washington Post ABC News poll. The former vice president has 28%. Warren has 23%, up 5 points since September. Both sit within that poll's almost 6-point margin of error. Sanders follows in third place with 17%. In the latest Fox News poll, Biden is at 31%, leading by 10 points. Warren at 21%, Sanders at 19%, another statistical tie. In hypothetical matchups against President Trump, according to the newest NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, both Biden and Warren would lead the president with 50% of the vote. Trump would fare 1 point better against Warren with 42% of support versus 41% against Biden. And in the Fox News head-to-head, Biden would have a 12-point advantage over Trump, 51 to 39%. Sanders would lead by 8 points, 49 to 41, and Warren by 5, 46 to 41. Steve, break it down for us.
Yeah, I think there's 2 pictures here. If we're talking about the general election, the head-to-head matchups there's 2 pictures to keep in mind. The first we just went through there, the national numbers, and that's consistent. What you just showed is consistent with what we've been seeing for a few months now. Every time I see Biden matched up against Trump in a general election national poll, it's a high single-digit, low double-digit lead for him. Even Warren has been leading him now pretty consistently nationally. There's a question of margin there. So that's one part of the picture. You see a president who has a 53% disapproval rating, who has 49% of the country saying they want him impeached and removed from office. He is going to be trailing likely these national head-to-head polls. The other part of the picture, though, is what just came out this morning. The New York Times, Siena, they did a survey of 6 key battleground states. They are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Arizona, and North Carolina. Trump was 6 for 6 in these states in 2016. If Democrats want to win in 2020, they probably got to win 3 of these states, 3 of these 6. And in those head-to-head polls, they got Biden up on Trump in 4 of those states. They got Sanders up in 3, and they got Warren up in 1. So an interesting difference there in that poll.
So
close in all of them, I should add.
Adrian Elrod, how do those polls look to you? What stands out? And especially in terms of Biden-Warren, do you expect any perhaps changes ahead, especially given the latest news of Elizabeth Warren revealing her plan to pay for Medicare for all?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. Mika, number one, I look at those polls and I think Donald Trump is in real trouble in terms of getting reelected. As Steve pointed out, we look at all the national polls. We look at head-to-heads with some of the top Democratic contenders versus Trump, and they show one thing, which is usually that Donald Trump is losing to Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, et cetera. But then you dig down into some of those battleground polls, which is really where this race is going to be won and fought. And Trump is underwater, especially when it comes to Joe Biden. Joe Biden beating him in 4 of those 6 major polls, which is where you've got to win in those states, those battleground states, in order to win the presidency. You've got to do well in those states. And that is exactly, Mika, why Joe Biden has done so well among the Democratic primary electorate at this point, because they see him, even though he's had, a few stumbles along the way, they see him as the most electable against Donald Trump. And that really hasn't shifted very much since the beginning of this race. I also think when Elizabeth Warren came out with her price tag for her Medicare for All plan on Friday, that really that was a moment for Joe Biden to seize on the fact that he wants to build and repair Obamacare, but not replace it with something expansive and expensive like Medicare for All. And then the Biden campaign, to their credit, seized on that moment and capitalized on it. And I think you're going to see that really play out in this next debate. But look, the race is tightening. We expected this to happen. Iowa's going to be a battle. All the first 4 early states are going to be a battle. But right now, Joe Biden is positioned to do well in South Carolina, and I think that's going to carry him into Super Tuesday, which is for the first time ever, a very, very delegate-heavy state in this primary.
Mike.
Steve, give us those states again and give us Elizabeth Warren's numbers.
Yeah, so the 6 states here, and this is among registered voters, New York Times Upshot Siena poll here. Pennsylvania, again, among registered voters, they got an even race, Trump versus Warren. Michigan, they've got Trump ahead of Warren by 6 points. Wisconsin, they've got an even race. Florida, they've got Trump ahead by 4 points. Arizona, they have Warren ahead by 2 points. In North Carolina, they have Trump ahead by 3 points. So they got Trump leading in 3, they got ties in 2, and they got Warren up by 2 in Arizona.
Michael Steele, the Wall Street Journal just skewers Elizabeth Warren's plan to pay for Medicare for all. And I would think this would be catnip for like the Biden campaign and for Republicans. I'll just read one part of it. Start with the overall fiscal math, which by itself is staggering. She concedes that her plan will cost only slightly less than the $52 trillion that the U.S. is expected to spend on health care in the next 10 years. She deducts from that what the feds now spend on Medicare and Medicaid, plus $6 trillion that the states contribute to Medicaid, the state federal children's health program, and government worker benefits. That leaves $30 trillion to finance. But Senator Warren waves her wand and says the bill will really be $20.5 trillion. It goes on. The question I have for you is that I think people are clued into this type of thing, just like the polls show that the Ukraine scandal is actually something that computes as not good, that the cost of this does seem unrealistic. It seems confusing. People have been through a lot with health care. They don't like another huge change that could be risky to them actually receiving health care.
I think that's well put, Mika, because throughout the battle of Obamacare, there was always this uneasiness about what it meant and what it would do to individuals, their families, their businesses, et cetera. We've now reached a point where the public and the system have sort of resolved those tensions in many respects, which is why Republicans found it hard to repeal and replace at the beginning of the Trump administration. Because no matter how you cut it, it's like a doctor who injects that dye in your vein. And says, oops, I injected the wrong dye. I got to get it out. Well, how do you get that out of your vein? How do you get it out of the system? You can't. And I think the public is now settled very comfortably, even if there may be some uneasiness at the edge with the Obamacare system. Elizabeth Warren now comes along and says, we're going to upend the entire thing and layer on top of that another $10 or $20 trillion. I don't think that's going to be an easy sell in any stretch of the imagination, particularly given how hard it was to sell Obamacare, which was a plan that Republicans originally proposed. So it's going to be a very difficult slope. And she still, at the end of the day, I don't think fully answers the question, will the middle class have to pay that $10 trillion gap? I think they will. The numbers on paper work, but you know what reality is.
The numbers are hard to comprehend. And Adrian Elrod, I think that Joe Biden has two strong focuses now. One would be his ability to take on Trump, that he has the experience to restore calm and order and move the nation forward. I would think the second would be Elizabeth Warren's plan to pay for Medicare for all. What are you hearing?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm hearing, Mika. I mean, the healthcare debate is the ultimate distinction in this Democratic primary. We've seen that play out in the debate so far. I think we're going to see it going forward in this next debate. And now that Elizabeth Warren has actually put a price tag on her plan, Democrats like Joe Biden will have a real contrast to make here. You know, we saw in this last debate, Mika, that Mayor Pete and Senator Klobuchar really sort of held the mantle of defending Obamacare. I think you're going to see Joe Biden make a much stronger point in this next debate because, again, the fact is he was obviously a big architect, a big component of getting Obamacare passed, and he has every right to try to defend those Obama-era policies, especially on health care, because, again, as Michael Steele pointed out, this was a very difficult bill to pass. The American people remember how hard it was, how it barely got through Congress. They weren't exactly thrilled with it at the time, but now I think a lot of Americans can't imagine upending this because it was so difficult to get passed in the first place. And I think you're going to see Joe Biden really drive home that distinction going forward.
Totally agree.
Hey, Jonathan Lemire, Steve's numbers that he just read off to us. Michigan down by 6 to Donald Trump. It's a big union state. The United Auto Workers have a very good health care plan. You can sort of understand the -6 for Elizabeth Warren there. There's also another aspect to her plan, which is clearly well thought out. A lot of people are going to disagree with it. A lot of people are going to agree with it. One element of it that struck me this weekend in talking to a couple of people up near where you grew up, Jonathan, incidentally, is the idea that anybody who has ever dealt with the registry of motor vehicles in their state, any government apparatus, the idea of handing over your health care to the federal government is scaring a lot of people. So those twin things, I think, I don't know.
Well, I think the good folks of Lowell, Massachusetts, or nearby would certainly give you an honest answer, Mike Barnicle. They won't be shy sharing their opinions if that's indeed where you were the last couple of days. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that, Elizabeth, there are huge questions that surround all of these candidates here. And look, these national polls obviously look really good for Democrats, but it's not a race about national polls. I think the Trump campaign fully anticipates that they'll lose the popular vote by more in 2020 than they did in 2016. With Warren, you have questions about the cost and feasibility of this health care plan. Do Americans really want the federal government telling them what they have to do in terms of insurance? For Joe Biden, it's been his very, shall we say, uneven performance on the campaign trail right now. And for Trump himself, it's been this, of course, we have to see how do voters react to this impeachment inquiry. So, Steve, let me ask you a question. The polls that you're seeing here in those battleground states in particular, are you seeing sort of trend lines? Are we seeing any impact yet from the impeachment inquiry on the president's approval in the battleground states that are going to really determine this election?
I mean, yeah, it's not measured from what I can tell, and this is a New York Times Siena, but if it were a drag on Trump, you're not seeing it in these polls. Right. A couple interesting findings here I could just share as well. It's a very interesting poll. They're doing some innovative stuff there. How about this one? Take the folks who voted for Trump in these battleground states. They went for Trump in 2016, and then they switched to Democratic congressional candidates in 2018. 2/3 of them in this poll say they're going to go back to Trump in 2020. And then also, the lead that Trump has in these states among non-college white voters, we're always talking about those voters in those states being the key for him. The lead he has with those voters, non-college white voters in these battleground states, identical to the lead he had in 2016. So if speaking to things just not budging at all.
All right, coming up, presidential candidates Pete Buttigieg and Cory Booker will both be our guests this morning. Plus, despite an escalating impeachment probe, some of the president's closest allies are still working to advance Trump's effort to get Ukraine to investigate his top political opponents. NBC's Josh Lederman joins us with that new reporting next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.